So you have people, coming saying, oh, good job, you guys did the ministry. You were able to reunify them. That's the goal. And then you have people that are, like Garrett said, just devastated, being like, why would God take him from you guys,
Hey everyone, welcome to Family Care Learning Podcast. My name is Brandon Jones. I am the Clinical Services Program Manager with Arizona Family Counseling, which is a ministry of Christian family care. I am super excited about today because if any of you remember, I had an interview with Haley not too long ago about their foster care experience. Now, Haley's a family coach and a child and family therapist with Arizona Family Counseling. And today, she brought her husband back to kind of really get the marriage version of this, right? The male and the female version, because I think there's so many nuanced intricacies when we think about the foster care experience and especially like grief around that foster care experience. And so Garrett, thank you also for coming and just being a part of this. And so just to remind our listeners, our viewers, as far as, would you just kind of give a short recap of your foster care story?
So we began the foster care process, it'll be 2 years ago this spring, and then got placements pretty quickly after that. In fact, I don't even think we were fully licensed yet. We got a call, and then the kiddos were with us up until this last January.
Okay.
And so we took 2 kiddos as our first placement, and then they were reunified in January. Okay. So that's kind of been our experience.
Yeah.
So.
And I know from last time when we were talking, right, you mentioned that you got into foster care with kind of the desire of going, man, we're cheering for parents. We're hoping that they can do the work needed to get their children back. Mm-hmm. But even when you have that kind of hope and desire, there's still can be kind of a sense of grief that I think a lot of foster parents have when you reunify a child, right. Because you're saying goodbye in a certain way. And I think one of the interesting things about foster care, right, is that when foster parents tell other people our foster children reunified, right, there can be like a variety of, some people hear that and are like, oh, thank God, like that's great. But then I think other times people can be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like that must be so hard. And so could you tell a little bit, maybe both of you, as far as what was your experience of that process and how people maybe responded?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're still going through that with how recent it all was. We have gotten both of those. I think people that don't know us as well and are familiar in a sense with foster care, we have gotten the celebrations, and there is the pain that I feel like, or the grief that we deal with, that it's hard to express. It's almost something that I don't often share in those conversations. One thing that you mentioned earlier, and through our training, we were talking about the training. Yeah. We were instructed from the beginning, like this is all about reunification. If you're doing foster care, like everything is, and I'm a rule follower, like take everything real literally. So I think that came into our conversations even throughout the process of, I'm like, no, we can't think of anything else other than reunification because that's what we were told to do. And like, that was even my mindset, in the very beginning, or for a long time. We had the girls for 14 months, or the kiddos, sorry. Yeah. But, so I think it almost felt like a glorified babysitter role. Yeah. That's something that it was really hard to, but when that transition happened, or throughout the process, feeling more that identity of a father or parents to the kiddos, whenever that did change, it was really hard to deal with. I don't think that we were prepared for it in the way that we experienced it. And it's hard to communicate that even with people that ask. Yeah. So you kind of have to play both sides to, when people are celebrating that, you almost feel the grief more. And then when people are solely looking at the grief of like, oh, it must be so hard for you. It's like, no, you got to offer the hope of, but they're back, and that was the goal. Yeah. Yeah.
I totally can connect with you with the, that fatherness, right? Like, because you go in with it with this mindset, and yet in every way you're providing care, you're attaching to these children and doing everything, and it's just natural for your heart to just kind of get connected. I think a lot of times, right? Like, I think of even when Jesus is like, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And you're like pouring all this treasure into these kids, right? And so it's so easy for your heart to kind of go there, even though you know, like, okay, this is going to end. But it's hard, right? Because it's like head heart kind of thing. And so, Absolutely. Yeah. And then the balancing of the different grief. And so, yeah.
Well, and I think, kind of what Garrett said. So you have people, coming saying, oh, good job. You guys did the ministry. You were able to reunify them. That's the goal. And then you have people that are, like Garrett said, just devastated, being like, why would God take him from you guys? You guys were such good parents. It's wrong. This is so wrong. How can we know they're going to be safe? Just all, people really grieving out loud. Yeah. That I think it's easy to even get anger, or have that feeling of anger when people are reaching out to you. And it's so genuine what people are saying. They're just, processing out loud. But I think we would sometimes, or actually I can't really speak for you, I'd say probably more for me, would really get caught up in feeling angry by either one of those responses from people. Sometimes being like, that is not helpful, in the moment, or feeling like we needed to explain, why we did it, or, say, well, we're grieving too. It's just, I don't know. It's just kind of tricky sometimes navigating both of those responses from people.
I've heard in some articles I've read the discussion of something called disenfranchised grief, where, for instance, in normal grief, right, someone dies, everyone kind of gets what that means, right? And where this disenfranchised grief is not everyone really understands that. And there's this variability, right? Because it's kind of going, I grieve, but I'm also supposed to be happy with that. And kind of, so can you two kind of talk about, right, like thinking about that, knowing, okay, there's this kind of both, and I'm happy in some ways, but then I'm also really disappointed and sad in other ways because of that connection. So I think about that. And then I think about just the process of grief, right? We think about even the stages of grief, right? The denial, the anger, bargaining, right? Like all of those different stages that you go through, and then people go through them differently at different paces, right? You can go one day, you could be totally bargaining and just trying to think about everything, what you could have done to change the outcome. Right. And then other times you're just mad. So I think one of the things that I've noticed in my work with families is that, well, husbands and wives do that in like a different way. The processing of grief. And so I think there can be a lot of times where there's like maybe even a miss between husbands and wives and just how they process grief. And then there's even like the norms of like, here's kind of stereotypical way maybe men handle grief versus women. And so we just kind of share a little bit about kind of what was your grief process? Maybe what were some of the things that you were thinking about, specifically in your role as a husband and wife, and there's
a lot there, Brandon. Some really good points. So one of the things in our grief counseling, which we might talk about a little bit later, but our counselor recommended that we read A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, and reading through that, I love C.S. Lewis, and I've never been so offended by what he's read, because he's such, there's so many powerful books that he's had and writings. And so there's specifically that was based on a death, like you just said. Yeah. And I used to describe it as that a couple months ago, right when it happened. It's like, it does feel like a death, because that relationship, while there's hope for maybe some sort of relationship in the future, or still knowing that they're there, like they were our only two kiddos. We don't have our own, anything like that. So my role as a father, there was a death there. Yeah. At least temporarily, at least presently. Yeah. So going through that book, there was parts where I was like, this isn't helpful at all. It's very different. And then finishing it did kind of come full circle. So I think that was really helpful in my processing to get to the final pages of that and kind of see where he ended and just applying what he said there. And I think, let's see, what else were we talking about? The roles. differences between the two of us.
Husband and wife and their roles or maybe the norms.
So as a man kind of going through grief, did you notice any differences from Haley as far as like maybe how you grieved or handled that grief compared to your wife?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Okay. 100% opposites.
Yeah. Okay.
So we probably would have guessed that we would have grieved differently, but living through it was very interesting and still is. I think you asked about typical differences in male and female, and I think guys tend to compartmentalize, and I absolutely experienced that on a day-to-day level, and not really understanding what the grief process was. So I could be in my logical brain and like, hey, they told us from day one, it's about reunification. We did that. That's a success, just like we talked about earlier. So I don't even let myself feel that death of fatherhood and in the moments. And there's this pain, but I can focus on, well, we're supposed to think this, and I can almost just tune that other emotion all the way down. Yeah. And Haley was feeling it from before the girls even left, knew what was coming, and was already kind of, and I'll let you talk about your own grief more, but she was way more versed in that, I would say, that you were able to grieve. And I remember through our grief counseling, we had 3 sessions, and by the weeks were explained what the stages of grief were. In the first one, I'm like, okay, I remember those. I don't really know them. By session 2, I was like, I already finished all 6 or all 5. It was, that was a tough 2 weeks, but I think I'm to acceptance. And then a conversation in between 2 and 3 happened, and I talked to my uncle actually, and he asked me the same question everyone else had, and it hit me in a different way. Yeah. And I just broke down, and then talked with Haley, and she got to see all of it. And I'm like, okay, I was actually in stage 1. I was in denial the whole time. And then I got to just go to the second, but I thought it was a logical 5 steps. It's like, you're in 1, you're in 2, you're in 3, all the way through. And then you graduate and you never go back to the other one. And I'm like, whoa, this is much more fluid. And even for guys, even compartmentally, I could be, in my logical side, I can almost think I'm in acceptance. Maybe it is still denial, but then you could get a memory that just hits you and it's uncontrollable, and then it takes you all the way back to the depression or anger. And it's just like a shock wave that it's just like, wow, what in the world? I thought I was past this. Yeah. And it's not that simple at all. So I think, I just feel like you're way better than that at me, at least understanding it, having that realization. And maybe that's most guys, or maybe it's just me, but I think, I kind of had that understanding for Haley, and I knew she's better at her feelings than I am. And even as we went through grief counseling, it's like hearing her, I'm just in awe. I'm like, wow, how does she understand that? Right. But it was, like I said, living through it, certainly learned a lot and continue to. But there was grief in different ways for sure. And at the start, I might have been like, I need her to get to where I'm at. Yeah. When she fully heals, she'll be where I'm at. But it's like, I think you're actually way further than, or you're processing through it with much more awareness than I was. Right. I think so many times as men, Garrett, thank you for saying that. Because, right, like even personally for grief experiences in my own life, right, I've compartmentalized, right? There's this sense of, I think, this vulnerability as a man, and I would rather just compartmentalize and kind of keep to the task. And, and there is that tendency to kind of go, well, I'm doing it the good way because I'm less dysregulated and I'm just kind of keeping focused on it. But there is something I think so powerful and beautiful about marriage relationships and our wives oftentimes having more of in connection with the emotions in that, and us being able to kind of learn from that. I think there also could be a tendency in the work that I've done with others that are going through grief, right, is that sometimes wives might feel like the husband's just trying to protect, right? And so it's like I'm compartmentalizing, I'm protecting. And yet sometimes the wives can kind of interpret that as like, do you not care? Do you have a heart of stone right now? Like, how is this not bothering you? And we're just going, let's power through it. And usually it's out of
care or concern of protection or just kind of moving forward and not wanting anyone in our family to hurt. And so I'm so thankful, just even as you were kind of acknowledging that, because as compartmentalized as we try to be, that grief process is still there for us as men, and we just sometimes try to avoid it as much as possible. And so, Haley, would you just share kind of maybe some of your experience with that? And
Yeah. So I think, Garrett, you did a great job kind of explaining that, and definitely realizing, maybe a month in that we were totally on different, different stages of our grief. And yeah, I know we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast about that. I really get stuck in that bargaining and that anger, stage. And I think for me, and I'm still there, sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe I'm moving forward, but then I get triggered by something, or there's a reminder, or, we even go somewhere that we took the girls, and it's like the last time we were there, the girls are with us, and it's like, then you just kind of see all maybe the bitterness, come back in. Yeah. So I think, for me, it's, so here I am, trying to move forward, knowing that I'm probably a little bit more have the tendency to sit in that anger, sit in that bargaining stage. And it's really easy for me to put that on Garrett, because who else is there to blame in the moment, So even if he's like, as you can probably tell in like the 10 minutes, like he's so sincere and he's so just kind and generous. So even in the best, good intentions, there would be so many times where I could just take things out on him and it'd be like, where did that come from? Where I remember even not too long ago, the other day, he was like, I made you coffee. I've been trying so hard all day just to just be kind and, meet your like love languages and whatnot. And he's like, and you're just not accepting any of it. And it's like, wow, why am I doing that? I'm just being so mean, or I'm being so rude. And I see that you're being so kind to me. Why am I treating you this way? And it's like sometimes, in our grief, really having to sit back and be like, why is this, and then thinking, okay, what has happened in our day? And, are there things that are maybe triggering me and, causing me to do this? And then how, as a couple, do we need to, come together and talk about this? But also what do I need to do in this moment to identify what's going on in myself and self-care, or just even naming it, right? Name it to tame it. We use it all the time. Dan Siegel, name it to tame it. And I think sometimes that is so helpful for us, just to be like, maybe we can't totally identify everything that's going on, but if we can at least say, okay, this is maybe something that is causing grief, or am I angry, or am I bargaining, or am I just, feeling all the feelings today that maybe yesterday I was doing really fine with, and now, it's happening. That's okay. It's okay. This is natural. But what do I need to be doing to make sure that I'm still respecting him and, finding that space, but also not, disregarding the fact that I'm kind of going to and fro in the grief.
And that's okay. Right. Like, and I like the kind of hearing from that, right, is this, if you know the stages and you're like, ooh, I'm angry today, then I imagine it's easier if you both are kind of like, Haley's angry today. And that's not about me, Garrett. It's not about you, Garrett, right? Like, it's her processing that and kind of, right, there's just, it seems like there needs to be this air of grace of, okay, we're each going to be through this, and when we get through those, when we're in those messy stages, we're messy, and oftentimes, like you said, it's the people closest to us, right? That are we're letting the anger or the bargaining or whatever kind of flow out onto, when really that's which can create kind of distance, which is the opposite. And so I hear you saying that one of the ways that you kind of maintain your intimacy in your marriage, well, one, you go into counseling together, but then two, like kind of naming the like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and this is not about you. Any other things that you've found that have helped to keep your intimacy, or kind of keep you two working on the same page together as you're going through the grief process differently? Anything else that you've noticed that have kind of really helped?
I think getting into those conversations, we can tend to avoid, maybe it's the time that it would take because we get into these long conversations about it, or but when we're both trying to navigate individually, it's hard. I feel hesitant to lean on her because I know she's going through it with me, and I feel hesitant to. I mean, part of it, there's part of me that wants to share because I know she's feeling, but it's like I need help too. So it's almost like we obviously can do that in a way as husband and wife, but we're also the two that are feeling it the most.
Yeah.
Where there's maybe other people that can support in different ways instead of putting that burden on Haley when I know she's going through it just as much as I am. But I think the conversations, that was great what you said, the naming it, or Haley, when you brought it up too, but identifying it was crucial because when you're just getting all of the symptoms or the results of what that actual feeling is, and we're not talking about it, it just builds up of this resentment or whatever, maybe the confusion. But when we have these conversations and kind of open up to each other, for sure, the intimacy and just the level of understanding, it's like, there's my wife, like there is why maybe this stuff is happening.
Yeah.
And instead of me putting those pieces together, because I'm not very good at that, when I put the pieces together for her, instead of her letting me know, I tend to get it wrong every time, and usually very wrong. So when we get to talk about it, then it's like, oh, that's why, not anything what I was thinking, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think God gives women, us guys, to give them patience and grace with us, right? Because we're like, I'm not putting these two together so often, right?
For sure.
But yeah. And so how did therapy, like, so you mentioned kind of going through this to process that. How do you think that supported this process?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we both really liked is, again, from that first question that you asked, you are getting so many opinions from people. And I don't even think people realize that they're giving you opinions. They just want to help you. You know what I mean? And I think so many times, if we've ever been through grief, we've all been in that moment where people are just trying to be there for us, but they just don't know what to say. And it just, it just gets a little messy or confusing. Yeah. So I think having somebody that honestly didn't know us, that, briefly knew a little bit of our situation, but was just able to kind of provide some insight, was just so helpful in the midst of all the other voices, and sounds. And then, as maybe some of our other foster parents are feeling, is sometimes too, you're having you're getting calls about other kids, and it's just like, and that brings in some confusion too. So I think for us, we decided that we weren't going to do that. We put ourselves on hold so we could have other people outside of, our circumstances just really invest into helping us. So I think that was something that was really huge with therapy, was just having somebody who even isn't necessarily super familiar with the foster care system.
Right.
That was really helpful for us. I think both of us too, in addition to counseling, both have mentors too that are somewhat familiar with foster care, walked along, side us as the process, but again, we're somewhat also removed. Yeah. That were investing into both of us individually. Yeah. Too. And I think that was really helpful. So we were getting help together, but we were also getting help individually, and just making sure, that we were being aware of, maybe the hardships that our marriage was facing, or just, talking about, this is what I'm struggling with, and I feel like what Garrett said, I feel kind of guilty. I don't want to put that burden on them because I know that they're hurting right now too. And I think we need to be transparent with our spouses too. I'm not saying don't tell them anything. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I think it's good to have people that are also, maybe married or a little bit older, that can just say, yeah, you know what, that is so hard. And what are you guys doing? Are you guys making sure that you're, self-care? Are you guys being intentional about reading together or going to do something? I think it was just nice to have that additional guidance. Yeah. I don't know.
And to add to that, on that question, I think growing up, getting to adulthood, you're constantly in a situation. This is the first time I've ever dealt with this.
Right. Yeah.
And then you spend a season as adults, and you start to say, oh, I kind of been through everything a time or two, and everything gets more familiar. And then all of a sudden we found ourselves in this situation where we were parents, we weren't. It's like the very first time. Yeah. It's like, how do you navigate this? So even in the conversations, just like I just talked about, that we had, I think a lot of that was framed by the homework or discussions that we had in the grief counseling. So it was incredible. I've never done counseling, I don't think, before this, grief counseling. And just, again, the conversations were one thing, but just the framework for navigating uncharted territories in that and together, because you can individually is one thing, and that's complicated enough.
Yeah.
But then throw in your spouse, and how do you guys navigate this together without some sort of roadmap?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, it was very confusing, and that definitely seemed to help.
Yeah.
Just realize where we're coming from, what the goal is, like what does it look like, what will it look like as we move further along. So I think that gave me a lot more comfort too, and just knowing it's not even the stages of grief, like it's not forever. Like you feel these, don't be afraid to get into that point, because there will be a time, and you might there might be seasons where you go back to it or whatever, but this isn't permanent, and it all will ultimately help grow you for whatever is to come.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I love that, right? That's oftentimes a theme in any type of therapy, that whatever emotion or difficulty you're going through, right? Just reminding yourself, this is not forever, right? And that's so powerful. I think a lot of times we have foster families that will make decisions sometimes that can be in light of thinking this is a forever kind of emotion. So they're going, I'm never doing this again, or I'm jumping right back in to avoid, right? Like, but that sense of let's just sit with it. And I love, you mentioned earlier as you were talking about Haley, and I think it was in the context of a therapy session where you were listening to her talk and you're like, wow, she knows a lot, right? Like, but even creating space to just hear each other out and kind of go, I really want to hear you, can even develop this greater sense of love, intimacy, admiration for one another, because you're going, oh my goodness, my wife, like she's awesome with this, right? And so I really connected with that of just kind of going, man, but you have to create space to do that. And as you guys were talking about the taking a break, there was a dear foster family when I used to be a licensing worker back in the day, and they had been doing this for, it was years, maybe even decades. And one of the things they always had done is as soon as the children would leave, they would take a 1 to 3 month break. And they would just spend time with her. They would vacation. They would create space to do these kinds of things. And, they were much older than we were, but I think that was from wisdom and experience that they were just going, no, let's create space. Let's talk about that. And then let's make decisions and move forward with that. And so I'm just so impressed, like, wow, praise God for the wisdom that he's just kind of given you both and just navigating this. I think there's just even thinking about all of the advice that I think hopefully any foster parent that is watching this, right? So you're going, do the self-care, right? Create space to do that talking, and therapy might be a great way as a catalyst to kind of go, here, let me show you what this is like, and now go practice this at home. Right. And then also having other people that are pouring into you that are individual, right? And so in those times when you would maybe typically rely on your spouse, but your spouse is going through it, and so you need to find other people. And I think that's why I love in the foster care and adoptive departments that they have these support groups where it's other people going through this kind of stuff. So you can have relationships with other people that might be able to support you in that way, or small groups, church groups, Bible study groups, those different mentors or different things. I think relationships are so powerful. And so I thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Any other advice or any other things that you would want to say to foster and adoptive parents that might be going through this, even now as they're watching it?
I like what you mentioned earlier. As we were driving here, we were talking about this, and you mentioned something, I think, that's just really encouraging for our foster families in regards to the classes that we take too, and the control piece. I remember you said something that I was like, that's money.
Yeah.
You need to share that.
Yeah.
I'll share that part.
Yeah. If you want
about the training classes?
Well, yeah, just your realization about control, and that you were told you don't have control, but how faith ties into that. And that's, it was like, man, that's good stuff.
Yeah, we did. So, I think one thing that we experienced that I was completely ignorant to was well, they tell you it's going to go something like this. It's going to be hard. That's what you said, which was great. That is what they told us. Like, it's going to be hard. And it's like, okay, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ready or I'm not, I don't know, but it's that doesn't even come close to explaining what it is that you're going through. And I think that tying into the level of control, I think that was one of the most difficult parts, is because we know these kids in this season better than anyone. We're spending all of our time with them. Obviously the number one thing is safety, for these children.
Yeah.
And then you have all these decision makers, and you're not one of them. You have maybe 20 people or, you know, there's so many from the judge to all the different players.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone's telling you something else, and everyone's pretty confident in how they feel, but then it's like, but you said something directly opposite to this other person.
Yeah.
And so they are likely going to be up for adoption in 1 week. And then the next week they are definitely going back home.
Oh, wow.
And we're just sitting here getting whiplash, like one to the next. It's like, what is the rest of our life going to look like? And this is before any decisions have even been made.
Right.
So
It's hard to move forward when you just
Yeah.
I think going into the process, we knew it was going to take faith. I think that's kind of what we talked about. It's like, we don't have control. We put it in God's hands. He's going to take care of it. Like, we know that his plan's better than we can make for ourselves. And then when we really got into it, living that out is so much different than thinking about it before it happens. Like thinking, oh, it's going to take faith. But then when you actually see these kids and you're their parents and you don't know, it's just like, God, I really hope you're doing, you know, I hope you're on it. You're going to complete what you said, or we had all this faith that you're going to do the right thing. And that's what brought us to this. But then actually putting it to the test of saying, well, now we kind of thought it was going to go this way.
Yeah.
It goes completely different, but are you still there? Like, are you really going to do what now we think this is better? It's our plan, but that is still our plan. So I think that was such a huge growth experience, of actually testing that faith and still having to, like, every single day, like doubt can creep in. It's like, was that the right thing? Like, should something else have happened? And it's just giving that over every day, but it strengthens that muscle almost. If you could think of it that way, it's just almost like, okay, what we kind of held on to often throughout the process, when 1 week it would be for sure one thing, and the next week they're going back home, was just like, every day you get, I mean, tomorrow is always uncertain. We knew that, but looking back, God provided every single day. Like, he got us to today. So it's, looking back, there's such comfort that, because there were so many scares where we thought it would have been way too soon.
Yeah.
And it was like, they're going to go. And we're like, I don't know that they're ready, but then something would happen and they would still be with us.
Wow.
And it's just like, that probably happened more than 5 times.
Yeah.
And so, and that took place over, 8 months. So it's just like, wow, we're still in this situation. God has provided every day up till to now. And then, when that did happen for us, it's just like, okay, well, why wouldn't it have happened all those other times? I mean, there has to be a reason. That's what we were able to hold on to. So it gave us great comfort and hope.
Yes.
That it's like, it's nothing like we would have planned if we could have done it ourselves. But I think if we had the opportunity, even with all the grief that's come with it, like, we would absolutely do that exact thing again. We would say yes if we had to redo it.
And I think it's just been really healing for us as a couple too, because now we're in a spot where we can talk about this stuff a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not that it's not hard, but it's definitely a little bit easier. But I think it's been really beautiful in a lot of ways that when we are able to talk and reflect on the case, like what Garrett's saying, he's like, man, there's so many times where we were like, what is happening? And looking back, we can say, oh, God totally used that situation or protected them, and while obviously, they're like what Garrett said, the doubt still comes in. I don't know. It is just really cool when you and your spouse can kind of be in that spot together, where you might not be exactly in the same spot in your grief, and that's okay. Yeah. That's just not, I don't really think that's always realistic for us to think, but it's nice when you have those moments where it's like, wow, we are so connected in this moment, or this makes sense to both of us. It's like, thank you, God, for that. And just that, assurance that he is through the case. He was with us. He was with the kiddos in our home, but he's also with us in our grief. And I think sometimes our grief tends to cause us to shift the other way of being like, God, where are you?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's really encouraging for our families, that if you're grieving, our heart goes out to you.
Yeah.
It's not easy at all, but look in those moments where faith, is, helping lead you through, and then you're able to see the glimpses of God's goodness. So, and like I said, there might be moments where you see it for a minute and then you don't feel like
it's
you
gone.
see it for
Where'd it go?
Yeah, where'd it go? It's gone, and you don't feel that way for a month, and that's okay. Everybody does that differently. But I think, I'm just really thankful for that for both of us, where we're kind of going through of like, okay, God, we can see you. So,
yeah. And as you two are talking about that, and you mentioned hope, Garrett, like I'm wondering if this is what it looks like when I read James 1, where it's like, consider it all joy when you experience various trials, because it produces, and there's different words that use depending upon the translation, but character or endurance, and those produce hope, right? Like as you focus on this all-loving God who sacrificed his son for us, and we're going, man, if you've what talks about in Romans 8, where it's going, if he who did not spare his own son for you, how will he not graciously give you all things, right? And so he's going, Haley, Garrett, I got you in this. Just look at me. And as you have worked together to kind of keep your eyes on him, right, there's this sense of hope or lightness, even in the midst of a really hard thing. And so I think that's my prayer for all of you that are out there that are maybe listening to this is you're not alone, right? And there's so many other families like Haley and Garrett that are going through that same thing. And so if you're in that place and you're feeling kind of stuck as a couple, right, our mission at Christian Family Care and Arizona Family Counseling is strengthening families and serving at-risk children in the name of Jesus Christ. And so if you're struggling with that at all, I'd love to encourage you to check out the Arizona Family Counseling website down below. If you're needing support in your marriage or kind of the grief processing, as Haley and Garrett mentioned, we would love to support you with that. And we could also point you to different support groups or different resources that would support you in your ministry. And Haley and Garrett, just thanks again for coming on and just sharing a little bit into your lives, and that just kind of opening that up so others can see. And so thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.